A millionaire impregnates and expels a black maid. 5 years later, everyone got shocked. But before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to stay updated on more captivating tales and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Grace Porter's small catering kitchen. She wiped the sweat from her brow as she checked the schedule for what felt like the 100th time, the Hawthorne Foundation Charity Gala. Just seeing the name made her hands shake. "Mama, can I help with the cupcakes?" 5-year-old Elijah's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, dark curls still messy from sleep. Grace's heart squeezed. Those eyes, Daniel's eyes. "Baby, shouldn't you be getting ready for school? Mrs. Johnson is sick, remember? No school today." Elijah climbed onto a stool, careful not to touch any of the shiny equipment. Such a good boy, so different from his father, Daniel Hawthorne. 5 years had passed since she'd last seen him. 5 years since that terrible day when he'd called her into his study, handed her a check, and told her to disappear. She'd been 3 months pregnant. "Just go," he'd said, not even looking at her. This never happened, but it had happened. Every stolen moment, every whispered promise, every touch, it had all been real. And now here was Elijah, living proof that you couldn't just make people disappear. The phone rang, startling them both. "Sweet Occasions Catering. This is Grace." "Ms. Porter." The voice was clipped, professional. "This is Margaret from the Hawthorne Foundation. We need to discuss some last-minute changes to tonight's menu." Grace's throat went dry. "Of course." She glanced at Elijah, happily arranging sprinkles by color. "I can handle any changes. Mrs. Hawthorne specifically requested no shellfish. Her daughter Sophia has developed an allergy." Sophia, Daniel's precious daughter with his society wife, the real heir to the Hawthorne fortune. Did she still wear her hair in those perfect blonde curls? Did she still look at the help like they were something stuck to her shoe? "Not a problem," Grace said. "I'll adjust the appetizer selection." After hanging up, Grace sank into a chair. What was she thinking taking this job? But she needed the money. The medical bills from Elijah's asthma attacks had wiped out her savings. This one gala would pay enough to get them through the next few months. "Mama?" Elijah's small hand touched her cheek. "Are you sad?" Grace pulled him close, breathing in his sweet little boy smell. "No, baby. Mama's just thinking. About my daddy." The question hit her like a punch. Elijah had started asking more lately. Why didn't he have a daddy like his friends? Where did his daddy live? Did his daddy love him? "Sometimes," she admitted. "But you know what? You and me, we're a team. The best team." Elijah nodded solemnly. "Can I still help with the cupcakes?" Grace managed to smile. "Tell you what, you can be my official taste tester." As she watched him carefully sample a vanilla cupcake, Grace's mind drifted to tonight. The Hawthorne mansion would be full of Silicon Valley's elite. Daniel would be there with Lillian, his perfectly polished wife, and Sophia, his golden child. Grace had managed to avoid them for 5 years, building her business from nothing in this small town an hour away from their world, but she couldn't avoid them forever. Not with Elijah looking more like Daniel every day. Those eyes, that determined little chin. Someone would notice eventually. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Ruby. "Got my scrubs ready for tonight. Nobody's gonna mess with your catering when they see a no-nonsense nurse helping out." Grace smiled. Ruby had been her rock these past 5 years. When Daniel had sent her away with that check, Ruby had taken her in, helped her start over. "You're stronger than him," Ruby always said. "He might have the money, but you've got the heart." Looking at Elijah, his face smeared with frosting and eyes bright with joy, Grace knew her sister was right. She'd survived worse than a charity gala. She'd survived giving birth alone, building a business from scratch, raising a beautiful boy who didn't have a mean bone in his body. But as she turned back to her work, preparing food for people who had once treated her like she was nothing, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Tonight she would walk back into that mansion not as a maid, but as a business owner, and this time she had something that all the Hawthorne money couldn't buy, a son who was the spitting image of his father. "More cupcakes, Mama?" Elijah asked hopefully. "Nice try, mister. How about some real breakfast first?" As she made him scrambled eggs, Grace tried to focus on the practical details. Equipment to pack, staff to coordinate, timeline to follow. But her mind kept drifting to that study, to Daniel's cold voice telling her to leave, to the way her heart had shattered when she realized that to him, she had just been a convenience, a distraction, something to be bought off and forgotten. Well, he was about to learn that some things couldn't be solved with a check. Some things demanded to be recognized. And tonight, those things would be serving canapes in his own home. "I love you, Mama," Elijah said suddenly, wrapping his arms around her waist. Grace hugged him back, fierce and protective. "I love you too, baby. More than anything in this whole wide world. More than pride, more than fear, more than the memory of a love that had turned to ashes in her mouth. Whatever happened tonight, she would protect her son, even if it meant facing down the entire Hawthorne family. The Hawthorne mansion hadn't changed in 5 years. Grace stood in the service entrance, watching her staff unload the catering van. Every window blazed with light, just like the night she'd left, clutching that check and her broken dreams. "You okay, sis?" Ruby adjusted her nurse's scrubs. She'd come straight from her hospital shift to help. "We can still back out." "No, we can't." Grace straightened her black blazer. She'd spent too much money on supplies. "Besides, I'm not that scared maid anymore." "Mama, look!" Elijah pointed at the mansion's grand facade. "It's like a castle." Grace's heart stopped. She'd had no choice but to bring him. Her regular sitter was sick, and the backup had cancelled last minute. "Remember what we talked about? You stay in the kitchen with Aunt Ruby." "I'll be good," he promised, but his eyes sparkled with curiosity. Inside, the mansion was a whirlwind of activity. Florists arranged massive bouquets. Waiters in black ties practiced their routes. And there, directing it all like a general commanding troops, stood Lillian Hawthorne. "The ice sculpture goes by the grand staircase," Lillian was saying, "and make sure the champagne is properly chilled this time." She turned, and for a moment, her eyes met Grace's. A flash of recognition, quickly hidden behind a mask of indifference. Of course Lillian knew. She'd probably known about the affair before Grace herself realized what was happening. "You must be from the catering company." Lillian's voice could have frozen hell. "The kitchen is that way. And do keep your staff out of the main areas. We don't want any unfortunate incidents." Grace forced a professional smile. "Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne. Everything will be perfect." The kitchen was a massive space with gleaming steel appliances. Grace's team moved with practiced efficiency, setting up their stations. Ruby settled Elijah in a corner with his coloring books. "The guests are arriving," a waiter announced. "They want the first round of appetizers." Grace checked her watch. Daniel would be here soon. Would he recognize her? Had he ever thought about the child he'd sent away? The party swelled above them, music and laughter floating down. Grace focused on her work, directing her staff, making sure every plate was perfect. She could do this. Just a few more hours. Then she heard it. His voice. "The company's expansion into Asia is proceeding exactly as planned. Daniel Hawthorne holding court in his kingdom." Grace's hands shook as she arranged smoked salmon canapes. "Mama, I need the bathroom." Elijah tugged at her sleeve. Ruby was busy helping a waiter with a dropped tray. Grace looked around desperately. "Okay, baby, but we have to be quick." They slipped into the hallway, heading for the service bathroom, but it was occupied. "There's another one up those stairs," Grace said reluctantly, "but we have to be very quiet." They climbed the grand staircase, Elijah's eyes wide at the crystal chandelier above. Just a few more steps. "Daddy!" a young woman's voice rang out. "The governor's asking about the new tech initiative." Grace froze. Sophia Hawthorne, 25 now, and even more beautiful than before, stood at the top of the stairs. Her perfect blonde curls were swept up elegantly, diamonds glittering at her throat. And there he was, Daniel Hawthorne. Silver threading his dark hair now, but still devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo, still able to make Grace's heart skip with just one look. A look that came now, starting casual, then sharpening into shock as his eyes found first her, then Elijah. Time seemed to stop. Grace could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Elijah's small hand in hers. Daniel's face went white. Those eyes, his eyes, their son's eyes. There was no denying it now. "My God," Sophia whispered. Then louder, "Daddy, isn't that the maid? The one who—" Other guests were turning to look. Lillian appeared as if summoned, her face a mask of cold fury. "I had to use the bathroom," Elijah said in the sudden silence, his voice small and confused. Lillian's lips curved in a cruel smile. Well, it seems the help has brought an unexpected guest." "Lillian," Daniel's voice was hoarse. He couldn't take his eyes off Elijah. "What's going on?" Elijah looked up at Grace. "Mama!" A camera flashed. Someone gasped. The whispers started spreading through the crowd like wildfire. "Daniel's eyes! The maid. Secret child. Scandal. Grace pulled Elijah close. We're leaving. Nobody is leaving. Lillian's voice cut through the whispers. Thomas, escort Miss Porter and her child to the study now. The security guard stepped forward. Grace backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The crowd had closed in around them. Please, she whispered, but she wasn't sure who she was begging. Daniel? God? The universe? Mama? Elijah's voice trembled. I'm scared. That snapped her out of it. Grace Porter might have been a maid once, might have let them break her heart and send her away, but she was a mother now, and nobody scared her child. We're going home, she said firmly, loud enough for everyone to hear. We don't need anything from any of you, not anymore. She turned to leave, head high, but Elijah stumbled. As she caught him, he started coughing, hard, racking coughs that she recognized with terror, an asthma attack, and his inhaler was in the kitchen. Help! She screamed, all pride forgotten. He needs help! And then Daniel was there, scooping Elijah into his arms. My car, he said. It's faster than an ambulance. Their eyes met over their son's head. In that moment, there were no whispers, no scandal, no 5 years of silence. Just 3 people bound by blood and breath, and the desperate prayer that it wasn't too late. The emergency room lights cast harsh shadows across Daniel Hawthorne's face as he paced the waiting room. His perfectly tailored tuxedo looked out of place among the plastic chairs and vending machines. Grace sat rigid in one of those chairs, still in her catering clothes, her eyes fixed on the double doors where they'd taken Elijah. He's had attacks before. Daniel's voice was rough with worry. Since he was 3. Grace didn't look at him. The doctors say he'll probably outgrow it. Why didn't you tell me? Now she did look at him, her eyes blazing. Tell you? Like when I told you I was pregnant and you handed me a check? Daniel flinched. Before he could respond, Ruby burst through the entrance, still in her scrubs from catering. Grace, I got here as fast as I could. How is he? They're still examining him. Grace's voice broke. Ruby wrapped her arms around her sister. This is all my fault, Grace whispered. I never should have taken that job. Never should have gone back there. Don't you dare blame yourself. Ruby's voice was fierce. The only person to blame is me. Daniel stepped forward. This is my fault. All of it. The emergency room doors swung open. Dr. Sarah Chen, her white coat crisp despite the late hour, approached them. Ms. Porter, Elijah is stable now. The attack was severe, but we got it under control. Grace sagged with relief. Can I see him? In a moment, but first we need to discuss something. Dr. Chen glanced at her tablet. Elijah's attacks are becoming more frequent and severe. There's a new treatment available, a type of immunotherapy that could significantly reduce his episodes, but what? Daniel demanded. It's experimental and expensive. Most insurance won't cover it. Grace's heart sank. She'd already maxed out her credit cards paying for Elijah's regular medications. I'll pay for it, Daniel said immediately, whatever it costs. No, Grace stood up. We don't need your money. This isn't about us, Grace. This is about our son. Our son. The words hung in the air between them. Now you want to be his father? Grace's voice shook. After 5 years of nothing? I didn't know. Daniel ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. I convinced myself the check would give you both a better life. Away from the scandal, the gossip. Away from you, you mean? Grace's laugh was bitter. God forbid the great Daniel Hawthorne admit he got the maid pregnant. Miss Porter? A nurse appeared. Elijah's asking for you. Grace turned away from Daniel, following the nurse, but his voice stopped her. I want to meet him properly. Grace didn't turn around. That's not your decision to make. Elijah's hospital room was dim and quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors. He looked so small in the big bed, his dark curls damp against the pillow. Mama? His voice was weak. Did I ruin the party? Grace's heart broke. No, baby. You didn't ruin anything. She sat on the edge of his bed, stroking his hair. Who was that man? The one who carried me? Grace closed her eyes. How do you tell a 5-year-old that his father had just discovered he existed? That was Daniel Hawthorne. He owns the big house. Elijah was quiet for a moment. He has eyes like mine. Before Grace could respond, there was a soft knock. Daniel stood in the doorway, still in his rumpled tuxedo, but somehow looking more human than Grace had ever seen him. The gift shop was closing, he said awkwardly, holding up a stuffed bear. I thought, a bear! Despite his fatigue, Elijah's face lit up. Daniel hesitated, then approached the bed. I heard you like animals. I love them. Mama takes me to the zoo sometimes. My favorite is the elephants. Really? When I was your age, I loved elephants too. Grace watched them, her heart twisting. They had the same smile, the same way of tilting their head when interested in something. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ruby. Lillian and Sophia just arrived. Want me to run interference? Before Grace could reply, Lillian Hawthorne swept into the room like an Arctic blast. Daniel, really? Abandoning our guests for this? Mother? Sophia appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable. Maybe we should... No. Lillian's voice could have cut glass. This has gone far enough. Daniel, the governor is waiting. Whatever game this woman is playing... Game? Grace stood up, fury replacing fear. You think I wanted this? You think I planned for my son to have an asthma attack at your precious party? Your son? Lillian's laugh was cruel. A convenient claim after all these years. I suppose you've run out of whatever he paid you. Get out. Daniel's voice was low and dangerous. Now, everyone stared at him. In 20 years of marriage, he had never spoken to Lillian that way. Daniel, Lillian began. I said get out. His shout made Elijah jump. The monitors beeped faster. Everybody out, Grace said firmly. He needs rest. To her surprise, they listened. Even Lillian, though she paused at the door. This isn't over, she said softly. That boy will never be a Hawthorne. After they left, Grace sat in the dim room, watching Elijah sleep. He clutched Daniel's bear, his breathing finally steady. A soft knock made her look up. Daniel stood there again, alone this time. I'd like to help, he said quietly. Not just with the medical bills, with everything. I want to know my son. You can't just walk in and out of his life. He's not a business deal you can negotiate. I know, Daniel's voice cracked, but I'd like to try, to be the father he deserves, the man I should have been 5 years ago. Grace looked at Elijah, at his small face so like his father's. I'll think about it. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even acceptance, but as the night deepened and the hospital quieted around them, it was a beginning. Tech Titan's secret love child revealed. The headline screamed from every newsstand in town. Grace quickly turned Elijah away from the newspaper display as they walked to her catering shop. Why are there people with cameras, Mama? Elijah asked, clutching her hand tighter. They're just being nosy, Grace said, hurrying them inside. The bell above the door chimed, but it couldn't drown out the shouts of reporters outside. Miss Porter, how long did your affair with Daniel Hawthorne last? Is it true you're demanding half his fortune? Does Elijah know about his father? Ruby was already in the kitchen, angrily slapping dough for the day's pastries. These vultures have been here since dawn. I had to call the police twice. Grace's phone rang again. Unknown number, like the dozens she'd been ignoring. But this time she recognized the area code. Daniel's office. Hello? Grace? Daniel's voice was tired. Have you seen the news? Kind of hard to miss when it's being shoved in my face everywhere I go. I'm so sorry, my PR team is trying to handle it, but... Handle it? Grace laughed bitterly. Like you handled things 5 years ago. That's not fair. His voice hardened. I'm trying to make things right. I've scheduled a press conference for this afternoon. I'm going to publicly acknowledge Elijah as my son. Grace nearly dropped the phone. You can't do that without discussing it with me first. The story's already out there. At least this way we control the narrative. Control the narrative? Grace's voice rose. This is our son's life, not some corporate takeover. A crash from the kitchen made her turn. Elijah had dropped a mixing bowl. His small face crumpled. I have to go, she told Daniel, hanging up. I'm sorry, Mama, Elijah whispered, looking at the mess. I didn't mean to. Oh, baby. Grace knelt beside him, wiping tears from his cheeks. It's okay. Everything's okay. But it wasn't okay. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Carlton Hotel, 1 p.m., Lillian Hawthorne. Ruby read the text over her shoulder. Don't go. It's a trap. If I don't go, she'll just keep coming after us. The Carlton Hotel's tea room was all crystal and soft music. Lillian sat at a corner table, elegant in cream-colored silk. Grace. She gestured to the empty chair. Do sit down. Grace remained standing. What do you want, Lillian? To make you an offer. Lillian opened her designer purse, withdrew a check. $10 million. In exchange, you and the boy disappear. No press conferences, no claims to the Hawthorne name. Grace stared at the check. $10 million. Enough to pay for all of Elijah's medical treatments. Enough to never worry about money again. The same old trick, she said softly. Throw money at the problem until it goes away. Don't be naive. Lillian's voice was silk over steel. Do you really think Daniel can be a father? He barely managed with Sophia and she was planned. You're nothing but a midlife crisis that got out of hand. My son is not a crisis. Grace's hands shook. He's a little boy who deserves to know his father. His father? Lillian laughed. Daniel will tire of playing daddy just like he tired of playing with you. Take the money. Give your son a fresh start away from all this. No. Grace turned to leave. You'll regret this, Lillian called after her. I promise you that. Back at the shop, Grace found Daniel waiting. He wore a business suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The press conference is in an hour, he said without preamble. I want you and Elijah there. Are you crazy? I just spent 20 minutes hiding him from reporters. Grace, please. Daniel stepped closer. I'm trying to do the right thing. Now, after 5 years of nothing? I know I messed up, but seeing him in that hospital bed, Daniel's voice cracked. He's my son, and I want the whole world to know it. Daniel. Grace softened despite herself. Have you thought about what this will do to him? The media attention, the pressure. I'll protect him. Like you protected me. Daniel flinched. Before he could respond, the shop's door burst open. Sophia stormed in, her face flushed. Is it true? She demanded. Are you really going to acknowledge him? Sophia, Daniel began. I'm your daughter. Tears streaked her perfect makeup. I've spent my whole life trying to make you proud. And now this. This woman's kid is suddenly more important. Nobody is more important than you, Daniel said. But Elijah is my son too. No, Sophia whirled on Grace. You did this on purpose. You trapped him. That's enough. Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. Elijah is your brother, and Grace. He looked at her, something soft in his eyes. Grace was never a trap. She was my biggest mistake, not because I loved her, but because I let her go. The silence that followed was deafening. Through the kitchen door, Grace could see Ruby comforting a confused and frightened Elijah. The press conference is cancelled, Grace said quietly. At least for today, we need to think about what's best for Elijah. I agree, said a new voice. They turned to see Dr. Chen from the hospital. I came to discuss Elijah's treatment plan, but clearly I'm interrupting something. No, Grace said quickly. Please come in. Elijah's health is more important than any of this drama. As Dr. Chen explained the new treatment options, Grace watched Daniel. He took notes, asked intelligent questions, showed genuine concern, so different from the man who'd dismissed her 5 years ago. But could she trust this change? Or was Lillian right? Was this just another phase that would leave Elijah heartbroken when Daniel lost interest? The answer would change all their lives forever, and time was running out to decide. Higher, Daddy, higher! Elijah's laughter rang through the park as Daniel pushed him on the swings. 2 weeks had passed since the hospital, and despite Grace's reservations, she couldn't deny the joy on her son's face when he spent time with his father. Careful, she called from the nearby bench. He gets dizzy easily. Daniel slowed the swing gently. He'd traded his usual business suit for jeans and a sweater, looking more human than Grace had ever seen him, more like the man she'd fallen in love with 5 years ago. Ice cream truck, Elijah pointed excitedly. Go ahead, Grace said, handing Daniel some money. No chocolate, it triggers his asthma. I've got it, Daniel said, pulling out his wallet. I can pay for my son's ice cream. Our son, Daniel's voice was soft. Please, Grace, let me do this. As they walked to the ice cream truck, a sleek black car pulled up to the park. Grace's heart sank as Lillian stepped out, perfectly coiffed despite the summer heat. Well, isn't this domestic? Lillian's voice dripped with disdain. Daniel seems to be enjoying his little adventure into fatherhood. What do you want, Lillian? To protect my family. Lillian sat uninvited on the bench. Did you know Daniel almost married someone else before me? A girl from the wrong side of the tracks like you. She got pregnant too. Grace's head snapped up. What? Oh yes. Daniel's father handled it, of course. Very generous settlement. The girl moved away, lost the baby conveniently soon after. Lillian's smile was razor sharp. History has a way of repeating itself. If you're threatening my son, I'm helping you understand who Daniel really is. The moment you and your boy become inconvenient, he'll do exactly what his father taught him to do. You're wrong. But Grace's voice shook. Am I? Ask him about Rebecca Martinez, about what happened in the summer of 1995. Lillian stood smoothly. Oh, and Grace? The board meeting is tomorrow. Daniel's future as CEO depends on their confidence in his stability. Shame if a scandal were to erupt right before the vote. She glided away just as Daniel and Elijah returned, ice cream cones in hand. Vanilla for you. Daniel said, then frowned. Grace, you okay? Who's Rebecca Martinez? Daniel went very still. The ice cream cone trembled in his hand. Where did you hear that name? Does it matter? Tell me the truth, Daniel. All of it. He sat heavily on the bench. It was a long time ago. Before Lillian. Did you get her pregnant? Yes. His voice was barely audible. My father, he said he'd handle it, make sure she was taken care of. What happened to the baby? Daniel's face crumpled. She lost it. At least, that's what my father told me. I tried to find her afterward, but she'd disappeared. And you never questioned it? Grace felt sick. Never wondered if maybe your father's handling it meant something else? I was young, scared. Like you were scared 5 years ago? Grace stood up. Elijah, baby, time to go. But Mama, Daddy was going to show me the ducks. Another time. Grace grabbed his hand. Grace, please. Daniel reached for her. This is different. I'm different. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you're still letting Mommy and Daddy make your choices for you. She hurried away, Elijah protesting beside her. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. Hawthorne Tech CEO faces board challenge. Sources claim leadership crisis amid personal scandal. That night, after Elijah was asleep, Grace's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Sophia standing there looking lost. I found something, Sophia said without preamble, in Mother's study, about Rebecca Martinez. She held out a manila envelope. Inside were old documents, photos, letters. She didn't lose the baby, Sophia whispered. Grandfather paid her to give it up for adoption. There were complications. She died in childbirth. Grace sank into a chair. Does Daniel know? Mother kept it all hidden. She was grandfather's secretary back then. She helped arrange everything. Sophia's hands trembled. She's planning to use this at the board meeting to prove Dad's pattern of irresponsible behavior. Why are you telling me this? Because Sophia looked at a photo of young Daniel with Rebecca. That could have been my brother or sister. And now I have another brother, and Mother wants to do the same thing all over again. Grace stared at the evidence of a decades-old tragedy. What do you want me to do? Help me tell Dad the truth before Mother destroys everything. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. I know I was awful about Elijah at first, but he's family, and family doesn't let family go through this alone. Upstairs, Elijah slept peacefully, clutching the teddy bear Daniel had given him at the hospital. Grace looked at his innocent face, so like his father's, history repeating itself. But maybe this time they could write a different ending. Her phone lit up with a text from Daniel. I know I don't deserve another chance, but please, let me explain. Not for my sake, but for Elijah's, and for Rebecca's. Grace looked at the envelope in her hands, at the faded photo of a young girl with dreams as big as her smile, a girl who never got to hold her baby. Come over, she texted back. There's something you need to see. The truth would hurt, but maybe, just maybe, it would finally set them all free. The Hawthorne Tech boardroom stretched out like a battlefield, all polished mahogany and leather chairs. Grace sat in the back, her heart pounding as board members filed in. Daniel stood at the head of the table, looking powerful in his dark suit but with shadows under his eyes. He hadn't slept after seeing Rebecca's documents the night before. This is a closed meeting, Lillian announced from her seat beside Daniel. Miss Porter should leave. She stays, Daniel's voice was firm. What I have to say concerns her too. The board chairman, James Wheeler, cleared his throat. Daniel, given the recent publicity, some shareholders have expressed concerns about your judgment. Understandable concerns, Lillian cut in smoothly. She opened a folder. In fact, I have documentation showing a pattern of behavior that... Before you continue, Mother, Sophia's voice rang out as she entered, maybe you should explain your role in the Rebecca Martinez case. The color drained from Lillian's face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Daniel's voice was deadly quiet. I spent all night reading the files you kept, the letters, the hospital records. Daniel, Lillian reached for his arm. Whatever you think you found, my father didn't handle anything. Daniel shrugged her off. You did. You arranged everything. The fake miscarriage story, the adoption, the cover-up when she died. Murmurs rippled through the board members. It was for your own good, Lillian snapped. You were 22, on track to take over the company. That girl would have ruined everything. That girl? Daniel's voice shook. Her name was Rebecca. She was carrying my child. And you let me believe. He broke off, overwhelmed. Mr. Hawthorne, the chairman interrupted. What exactly are you saying? I'm saying that 25 years ago, my father's secretary, now my wife, helped cover up a death to protect company interests. Daniel straightened. And now she's trying to do the same thing to my son, my living, breathing 5-year-old son. This is ridiculous, Lillian stood. Everything I did was to protect this company. Your father understood that. The board understands that. Sometimes sacrifices must be made. Sacrifices. Grace couldn't stay quiet any longer. She stood, hands shaking. Is that what you call it when you destroy lives? When you tear families apart? You're just like her, Lillian sneered. Another gold digger trying to trap a Hawthorne man. That's enough. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. I've spent my whole life trying to live up to my father's legacy, trying to be the man he wanted me to be. But you know what? His legacy is nothing but lies and broken lives. He turned to the board. 25 years ago, I let them convince me that the company was more important than doing the right thing. I've regretted it every day since. I won't make the same mistake with Elijah. Daniel, the chairman warned, think carefully about what you're saying. Oh, I have. Daniel smiled grimly. I'm saying that if this board wants me out, because I refuse to abandon my son, then I resign. Effective immediately. Chaos erupted in the boardroom. Lillian's face turned purple. You can't do this. Watch me. Daniel loosened his tie. The company can have my shares, my position, everything, but it can't have my soul. Not again. Dad. Sophia stepped forward, tears in her eyes. I'll resign too. We'll start over. This is absurd, Lillian spat. Throwing away generations of work for what? For love, Grace said simply. For family. The real kind, not the kind you can buy and sell. The chairman stood. Perhaps we should take a recess? No need. Daniel pulled off his tie completely. I'm done here. Grace? He held out his hand. Would you and Elijah like to get some ice cream? Before Grace could answer, the boardroom doors burst open. Ruby rushed in, panic on her face. Grace! It's Elijah. He collapsed at school. They're taking him to the hospital. The world seemed to tilt. Grace swayed, but Daniel's arm was around her instantly. My car's faster, he said, just like that first night at the gala. Sophia, go. Sophia was already pulling out her phone. I'll handle everything here. As they raced through the building, Grace heard Lillian's voice behind them. Daniel, the meeting isn't finished. But Daniel didn't even look back. His whole focus was on getting to their son. In the car, Grace's hands shook as she tried to call the hospital. Daniel took her hand. He'll be okay, he said softly. And this time I'm not going anywhere. Grace looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd finally chosen love over legacy. Promise? Promise. Daniel's voice cracked. No more running, no more hiding. Whatever happens, we face it together. As they sped toward the hospital, Grace thought about Rebecca Martinez, about the baby that never got a chance, about all the secrets and lies that had led them here. Maybe this was their chance to make it right, to show that sometimes love really could conquer money and power and generations of wrong choices. But first, they had to get to their son. Everything else, the company, the scandal, the future, could wait. Family came first. The real kind. The kind you couldn't buy or sell or hide away. The kind worth fighting for. The hospital corridor seemed endless as Grace and Daniel ran toward the pediatric emergency unit. Dr. Chen was already waiting for them, her face grave. What happened? Grace gasped. Elijah had a severe asthma attack during recess, Dr. Chen explained. But there's something else. The tests we ran showed an underlying condition we hadn't caught before. Daniel gripped Grace's hand. What kind of condition? A rare form of autoimmune disorder. It's been making his asthma worse, and now it's affecting his heart. Grace's knees buckled. Daniel caught her, helping her into a chair. Can you treat it? His voice was steady, but his hand trembled against Grace's shoulder. There's a new treatment protocol, Dr. Chen said, but it's highly experimental. Only 3 hospitals in the country are authorized to perform it. Cost isn't an issue, Daniel started, but Dr. Chen shook her head. It's not about money. The treatment requires a genetic match. A blood relative. Grace looked up sharply. You mean? Yes. We need to test both parents. And any siblings. As if on cue, Sophia burst through the emergency room doors, still in her business suit from the board meeting. I came as soon as I could, she said breathlessly. How is he? Before anyone could answer, another voice cut through the tension. Well, isn't this touching? Lillian stood in the doorway, her elegant outfit unchanged from the board meeting. But now she held a thick folder in her manicured hands. Mother, Daniel's voice was tired. Not now. Oh, but now is exactly the right time. Lillian smiled thinly. You see, I have something you need to know about Elijah's medical history. Grace stood up. What are you talking about? Did you really think I wouldn't investigate? Lillian opened the folder. 5 years ago, when you first told Daniel you were pregnant, I had my own tests done, on both of you. What tests? Daniel demanded. DNA tests, darling. And guess what they showed? Lillian's smile grew cruel. There's a 0% chance you're Elijah's father. The silence that followed was deafening. Grace felt the blood drain from her face. You're lying, she whispered. Am I? Lillian held out the papers. See for yourself. The dates, the lab results, all quite clear. Daniel took the folder with shaking hands. Grace watched his face as he read, her heart breaking all over again. Daniel, she pleaded, there was never anyone else. She's lying. The labs don't lie, dear, Lillian said smoothly. Now about that board meeting. Stop. Sophia's voice cut through the tension. She stepped forward, snatching the folder from Daniel's hands. Just stop, Mother. Sophia, this doesn't concern you, doesn't it? Sophia's laugh was bitter. Like Rebecca Martinez didn't concern you. Like all your other lies don't concern me. She turned to Daniel. Dad, look at the lab name on these results. Really look at it. Daniel frowned, taking the papers back. Martinez Medical Laboratory. Rebecca's family owned a small medical testing facility, Sophia explained, before they were forced to sell it. Guess who bought it? Understanding dawned on Daniel's face. You didn't. Oh, she did. Sophia faced her mother. I found the purchase records last night along with everything else. You bought the lab through a shell company just to create fake test results. Just like you forged Rebecca's medical records all those years ago. You can't prove that, Lillian snapped, but her composure was cracking. Actually, I can. Sophia pulled out her phone, playing a recording. Lillian's voice filled the corridor. Make sure the dates match. Yes, negative paternity. No one will check the lab's credentials. Lillian's face went white. You recorded me? I learned from the best, Mother. Sophia's voice was ice. You taught me to always have leverage, remember? Dr. Chen cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt, but Elijah needs those genetic tests. Real ones. Now. Test me too, Sophia said firmly. He's my brother, no matter what she says. Lillian backed away, her careful facade crumbling. Daniel, surely you can't believe... Security! Dr. Chen was already on the phone. We need an escort for a visitor. As security led a protesting Lillian away, Grace turned to Daniel. His face was unreadable. I never doubted, he said quietly. Not for a second, he's my son. I see myself in him every day. A nurse appeared. Ms. Porter, Elijah's asking for you, and he's asking for his daddy too. In Elijah's room, machines beeped steadily. He looked so small in the big hospital bed, but his eyes lit up when he saw them. Daddy, did you bring more ice cream? Daniel laughed through tears, sitting carefully on the bed. Not this time, buddy. But how about I tell you a story instead? About elephants? About family, Daniel said, taking Grace's hand. About how sometimes it takes a long time to find your way home, but when you do, it's worth the wait, Grace finished softly. As Daniel began his story, Grace watched them together, her son and his father finally where they belonged. Outside, she could hear Sophia talking with Dr. Chen about the genetic testing, taking charge, just like the big sister she was meant to be. Family. Not the kind you could fake with false papers and bought loyalty, but the real kind, the kind that showed up when you needed them most, the kind that fought through lies and pain to find the truth, the kind worth waiting for. The waiting room of the genetic testing lab felt like it was closing in on them. Grace watched Daniel pace back and forth, his expensive shoes wearing a path in the carpet. 3 days had passed since Lillian's attempted deception, but these results would tell them something even more important. Whether Daniel could be the donor Elijah needed. Mr. and Ms. Hawthorne, a lab technician appeared with a folder. Porter, Grace corrected automatically. I'm Ms. Porter, for now, Daniel murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. Before she could process what he meant, Dr. Chen joined them, taking the results. Well, she said after reviewing the papers, there's good news and complicated news. Grace's heart stopped. Good news first, please. The good news is that Daniel is definitely Elijah's biological father. The genetic markers are unmistakable. Daniel sagged with relief, though they'd never really doubted it. And the complicated news? While you're a match for the basic treatment, there's a better option. A sibling match would be ideal. Dr. Chen looked at them carefully. Has Sophia been tested yet? As if summoned by her name, Sophia rushed in, still wearing her gym clothes. "Did I miss it? Do you have the results?" "Perfect timing," Dr. Chen smiled. "We were just discussing sibling compatibility." "Test me," Sophia said immediately. "Whatever Elijah needs." Grace watched this woman, this sister who had once looked at her with such contempt, roll up her sleeve without hesitation for the blood draw. How much could change in just a few weeks? "It'll take a few hours to process," the technician said, drawing Sophia's blood. "Maybe you should all get some rest." Rest seemed impossible, but they needed to check on Elijah. Ruby had been staying with him at the hospital, keeping him entertained with stories and crafts. When they reached his room, they heard laughter. Elijah sat up in bed, teaching Ruby how to make paper airplanes. "Daddy!" He brightened when he saw them. "Look what I made." Daniel caught the slightly crumpled paper airplane with a grin. "Pretty good aerodynamics, buddy. Been practicing?" "Aunt Ruby showed me. And guess what? The nice nurse said I can have Jell-O for dinner." Grace's throat tightened. Such a normal kid thing to be excited about, even here in the hospital, even with all these machines monitoring his little heart. "Speaking of dinner," Ruby stood, stretching. "I should grab something from the cafeteria. Anyone want to join me?" "I'll go," Sophia volunteered. "I need coffee anyway." After they left, Elijah looked at his parents seriously. "Are the doctors going to fix my breathing?" Grace and Daniel exchanged glances. They'd tried to shield him from the scarier details, but Elijah was too smart not to know something was wrong. "That's the plan, champion." Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. "The doctors just need to figure out the best way to do it." "Will it hurt?" "Maybe a little," Grace admitted, smoothing his curls. "But we'll be right here with you. Promise?" "Promise," they said together. A knock at the door made them look up. James Wheeler, the board chairman, stood there awkwardly. "Daniel," he said, "may I have a word? Whatever you have to say, you can say it here." Daniel didn't move from Elijah's bedside. Wheeler cleared his throat. "The board has been discussing recent events. Lillian's actions have raised serious concerns." "I already resigned," Daniel reminded him. "Yes, well, about that." Wheeler straightened his tie. "We've voted to reject your resignation. Furthermore, we'd like to offer you the position of executive chairman." Daniel blinked. "What?" "The company needs stability. More importantly, it needs moral leadership." Wheeler glanced at Elijah. "Recent events have made it clear where that leadership lies." "And Lillian?" "She's been removed from the board. We're also launching an investigation into her handling of historical matters." Grace knew he meant Rebecca Martinez. Finally, after 25 years, the truth would come out. "I'll need time," Daniel said. "My son's health comes first." "Of course." Wheeler nodded at Grace and Elijah. "Family should always come first. Take all the time you need." After he left, Daniel turned to Grace. "What do you think?" Before she could answer, Sophia burst back in, waving a paper. "I'm a match, a perfect match." Dr. Chen followed, smiling. "The sibling markers are ideal. With Sophia as the donor, we can start treatment as soon as tomorrow." Elijah looked confused. "What's a donor?" "It means your big sister is going to help make you better," Grace explained, tears in her eyes. "I have a big sister." Sophia approached the bed carefully. "Yeah, Squirt, you do. If that's okay?" Elijah considered this. "Do you like elephants?" "Love them. Then it's okay." He held out a paper airplane. "Want to learn how to make these?" As Sophia sat down for her paper airplane lesson, Grace felt Daniel's arms slip around her waist. "Move in with me," he whispered. She turned to face him. "What?" "Not to the mansion. Too many bad memories. But I bought a house, near the park where we take Elijah. It has a big backyard, room for a swing set." "Daniel, I know it's fast. I know we have a lot to work through. But these past weeks have taught me what matters." He glanced at their children playing together. "Life's too short to waste any more time." Grace looked at the scene before her. Elijah, teaching his big sister to fold paper just so. Sophia, listening with total concentration. Both of them laughing when an airplane went astray. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes. Yes to the house. Yes to trying. Yes to everything." Daniel's kiss was gentle, full of promise. Behind them, Elijah made gagging noises, while Sophia laughed. Tomorrow would bring challenges. The treatment, recovery, rebuilding the company, healing old wounds. But tonight in this room, they were just a family. Imperfect, unconventional, but finally, wonderfully whole. The recovery room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors and Elijah's soft breathing. Grace watched her son sleep, still pale but stronger every day since the treatment. Sophia dozed in a chair nearby, her arm still bandaged from the donation procedure. "Coffee?" Daniel appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups. "My hero." Grace accepted one gratefully. She'd barely left Elijah's side in the week since the treatment. "The doctors are optimistic," Daniel said, sitting beside her. "His numbers are improving faster than expected." "Must be those Hawthorne genes." Grace managed a small smile. "Strong and stubborn." "Speaking of Hawthornes," Daniel hesitated. "The police want to talk to us about pressing charges against Lillian." Grace's hand tightened around her coffee cup. A week had passed since the board had discovered the full extent of Lillian's deceptions, not just Rebecca Martinez and the fake DNA tests, but years of cover-ups and manipulations. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. "I want justice. For Rebecca. For her baby." Daniel's voice cracked. "For everything Lillian stole from all of us." "Daddy?" Elijah's sleepy voice interrupted them. "Is it moving day?" Grace and Daniel exchanged glances. They'd promised Elijah that once he was better, they'd all move into the new house together. "Not quite yet, champion," Daniel said. "The doctors want to make sure you're super strong first." "But soon?" Elijah's eyes were hopeful. "You said I could have a treehouse." "The builders are working on it right now," Daniel assured him. "And guess what? Your sister helped design it." Sophia stirred at the mention of herself. "Did someone say treehouse?" "Tell me about it again," Elijah demanded. As Sophia described the treehouse plans, complete with rope bridges and secret compartments, Grace slipped out into the hallway. She needed a moment to process everything. The new house waited for them, keys burning a hole in Daniel's pocket. Their future waited too, full of promise and second chances. But the past wasn't done with them yet. "Grace," Ruby appeared carrying a newspaper. "You need to see this." The headline made her stomach drop. "Hawthorne scandal deepens. Former board member linked to 1995 death." "They found Rebecca's original medical records," Ruby said softly. "The ones Lillian tried to destroy. She didn't die from complications. She died because they denied her proper care trying to cover up the pregnancy." Grace felt sick. "Does Daniel know?" "The police are telling him now, but that's not all." Ruby hesitated. "They found adoption papers. Rebecca's baby survived." The world seemed to tilt. "What?" "A private adoption arranged through one of Lillian's contacts. The baby was given to a family in Europe. Daniel's first child," Grace whispered. "All this time." "Grace?" Sophia appeared in the doorway. "Dad needs you. He just got some news." Grace found Daniel in the hospital chapel, sitting alone in the dim light. "I have another child out there," he said without looking up. "A daughter. Rebecca's daughter. She'd be 25 now." Grace sat beside him, taking his hand. "The police found her," Daniel continued. "She's a doctor in London. Her name is Emma." His voice broke. "She has Rebecca's smile. I saw a photo." "Have you contacted her?" "Not yet." "How do you even start that conversation?" "Hello, I'm your father, and my wife helped hide your existence for 25 years. You tell her the truth," Grace said softly. "All of it. And then, you give her time." Daniel finally looked at her. "What if she hates me?" "She might at first, but she deserves to know her history, and Elijah deserves to know his sister." "Sisters," Daniel corrected. "Sophia's already looking up flights to London." Back in Elijah's room, their son was sitting up, coloring with markers that Ruby had smuggled in. "Look, Mama," he held up his drawing. "It's our new house. See? There's you and Daddy, and me and Sophia, and Aunt Ruby, and—" He frowned at the paper. "Is there room for more people?" Grace met Daniel's eyes, saw the same mix of hope and fear she felt. "Always, baby. There's always room for more family." "Good," Elijah said decisively, adding another figure to his drawing. "Because I like having a big sister. Maybe I could have more?" Daniel made a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Later that night, after Elijah was asleep and Sophia had gone home to rest, Grace found Daniel staring out the hospital window. "I called Emma's adoptive parents," he said quietly. They've known who I was all along. They've been sending Lillian updates about her for years. What are you going to do?" "I'm flying to London next week. Emma agreed to meet me." He turned to Grace. "Will you come with me? You and Elijah, once he's strong enough?" "Are you sure? This should be private, maybe." "You're my family." Daniel's voice was firm. "All of you. No more secrets. No more hiding. Whatever happens with Emma, we face it together." Grace looked at their sleeping son, thought of Sophia at home, of Emma across the ocean, a family pieced together from broken dreams and second chances. "Together," she agreed. Outside, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in colors of hope. Tomorrow would bring more challenges: Elijah's recovery, Lillian's prosecution, the journey to London. But tonight, in this quiet moment between what was and what could be, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in years: peace. The kind that comes from knowing that sometimes the longest roads lead you exactly where you were meant to be. The kind that comes from realizing that family isn't just about blood or names or legacies. It's about love. The kind that heals. The kind that forgives. The kind that finds its way home, no matter how long it takes. 6 months later, the garden of the new Hawthorne home bloomed with autumn flowers. Grace stood at the kitchen window, watching Elijah chase his sister Emma across the lawn, their laughter carrying through the open windows. At 7, Elijah was healthier than he'd ever been, his cheeks rosy with exercise and happiness. "They're going to wear themselves out before the party," Daniel said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "That's the plan," Grace smiled. "Our tired 5-year-old is less likely to spill punch on his new suit." Today was special, not just Elijah's birthday party, but also the day they'd make everything official. The adoption papers were ready, waiting for Emma's signature. At 25, she had her own successful medical practice in London, but she'd taken a sabbatical to spend time with her newfound family. The first meeting in London had been tense, filled with tears and hard questions. But Emma had her mother Rebecca's capacity for love and forgiveness. When she saw Elijah's photo, saw her own eyes mirrored in his little face, something shifted. "He needs a big sister," she'd said simply, "and I've always wanted siblings." The doorbell rang. Sophia entered, carrying a massive wrapped package. "Where's the birthday boy?" "Sophia!" Elijah ran in from the garden, Emma close behind. "Is that for me?" "No, it's for your other brother who's turning 6 today." Elijah giggled. "I'm your only brother." "Thank goodness," Sophia winked. "One troublemaker is enough." The house filled quickly with guests. Ruby arrived with her new boyfriend, a kind pediatrician she'd met during Elijah's hospital stays. James Wheeler came with his wife, bringing news that Hawthorne Tech's charitable foundation was funding a new pediatric research center, named in Rebecca Martinez's honor. "The first trials will focus on childhood autoimmune disorders," he told Daniel. "Your daughter Emma's research will be instrumental." Emma, overhearing, blushed. She still wasn't used to being publicly acknowledged as a Hawthorne, but she was proud to carry on her mother's legacy of helping others. "Time for cake," Grace called, bringing out a massive elephant-shaped creation that had taken her bakery team 3 days to perfect. As they gathered around the dining room table, Grace noticed someone standing in the doorway. Lillian. The room went silent. Under house arrest pending her trial, Lillian had been granted special permission to attend. Grandma Lillian. Elijah, innocent of the tension, ran to hug her. Lillian stiffened, then slowly, hesitantly, hugged him back. She looked older, grayer, her designer clothes replaced by simple slacks and a sweater. "I brought a gift," she said uncertainly, holding out a small package. Daniel stepped forward, but Emma got there first. "Would you like some cake?" she asked Lillian, her voice gentle but firm. "There's plenty of room at the table." Grace watched understanding dawn in Lillian's eyes, understanding that forgiveness was possible, but it had to be earned. One step, one birthday party, one genuine attempt at change at a time. "Happy birthday, dear Elijah," they sang together, all of them. Grace and Daniel, Emma and Sophia, Ruby and Wheeler, and yes, even Lillian, her voice wavering but present. Elijah blew out his candles in one mighty puff, no trace of asthma in his strong lungs. "What did you wish for, Squirt?" Sophia asked. "Can't tell," Elijah said, "but it already came true anyway." Later, after the party wound down and Elijah was playing with his new toys, Daniel gathered everyone in the living room. "We have an announcement," he said, holding Grace's hand. "Two, actually." Grace nodded, squeezing his fingers. "First, the adoption papers. Emma, if you're still sure." Emma stood, walking to the desk where the papers waited. "Never been more sure of anything," she said, signing with a flourish. "And the second announcement," Ruby prompted, though her knowing smile suggested she'd already guessed. Grace touched her stomach, still flat but holding their newest secret. Elijah's wish might have had something to do with being a big brother. The room erupted in joy. Hugs, tears, laughter, all the ingredients of family mixed together in their own unique recipe. Later that night, after Elijah was asleep surrounded by new toys, after Emma had retired to her room to call her adoptive parents with the news, after Sophia had finally stopped planning the new baby's entire future, Grace and Daniel sat in their garden. "Do you ever wonder," Grace asked, What would have happened if Elijah hadn't had that asthma attack at the gala? We would have found our way here eventually, Daniel said. Love always finds a way home. Above them, a light burned in Emma's room, their oldest, finally found. In the next window, Elijah slept peacefully, their miracle, their bridge between past and future. And somewhere in Grace's womb, their newest love story was just beginning. Inside the house, on the mantel, sat a photo of Rebecca Martinez, smiling her daughter's smile. Not forgotten anymore, but honored, remembered, loved. Her story lived on in Emma's compassion, in Elijah's strength, in the way Sophia had learned to open her heart, in the lessons Daniel had finally learned about what really matters. Look, Grace pointed to the garden. Fireflies were rising from the flowers, tiny lights dancing in the dusk. Remember what you told me about fireflies that first night in the hospital? That they remind us there's magic in the world, Daniel smiled. That sometimes the most beautiful light comes after the darkest times. Grace leaned against him, feeling their baby flutter beneath her heart. Above them stars began to appear, each one a wish, a dream, a possibility. The Hawthorne fortune would still be there tomorrow. The company would still need running. The foundation would still need guidance, the world would still need changing. But tonight was for family, for love that persists, for hearts that heal, for second chances and new beginnings, for the kind of wealth you can't count in dollars, the wealth of a child's laughter, a sister's forgiveness, a mother's legacy, a father's redemption, for the simple truth that sometimes the most precious inheritances aren't the ones written in wills or counted in stock shares. Sometimes they're written in the heart, in the quiet moments between darkness and dawn, in the way love echoes through generations, finding its way home at last. The end